Welcome to the Let's Get Entrepreneurial podcast, your go-to resource for navigating the world of entrepreneurship. In this episode, we're tackling one of the most critical aspects of entrepreneurship, planning and executing a successful exit. This is part one of two parts.
Our podcast addresses tools and concepts that are useful for the launch and growth of entrepreneurial ventures. Your two hosts will be Professor Gary Palin and serial entrepreneur Ryan Budden.
Hello, Ryan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing brilliantly. What about you?
Doing well. I understand you are into the construction business these days.
You could say that. I've been doing a lot of home repairs. I'll put it that way. Not too much forward progress, but stopping problems.
All types of fun. Ryan, today I thought a good topic would be to talk about exit strategies. As I was looking at all the variations of the exit strategies, it's fairly in-depth, so I thought we could do this in two parts.
Absolutely.
An exit strategy is the plan for selling ownership in a company and recouping the investment. You have to look at it from two versions. One is the recoupment of investment from the investor's perspective, and then also the recoupment from the entrepreneur's perspective. Sometimes they are parallel, other times they're diverse. And basically the three areas you see, or the three methods to exit, is one is an acquisition by another company. A second type will be an IPO, an initial public offering, where the company is sold on one of the stock exchanges. And then the third one, not as often used, is passing the business on to family members or key employees. Obviously, the passing on the business to key family members or key employees, that's from the entrepreneur's eyes. The investors really aren't interested in this because they want cash back.
Right.
But the acquisition by another company or the IPO can be in parallel to what the entrepreneur's viewpoint is. When you're looking at a exit strategy, you want to understand up front what are the goals and visions of the founders. Blend that with the interest of the investors and the stakeholders. So those are considerations when you're determining what direction that you want to move. I highly recommend before starting the business, you should plan how to exit. Our listeners, if they have not done that and they're running a business, I would suggest start the exit strategy or start planning your exit now, because you don't want to have to make decisions when you're about to exit, because that devalues the business typically.
Right. You can make yourself look a lot better if you're taking steps as you're going forwards. Also, keeping your eye on the ball. If you know where you're trying to end up, you're much more effectively going to get there rather than just pushing the business forwards in whatever metrics are going to be measured at the end.
That's something we've talked about in other areas, but if you don't know where you're going, how are you going to get there?
Right. I think that's a basic tenet of any good business practice, whether you're in business for yourself or entrepreneurship. Just knowing where you're going is going to lead to a lot better results.
Now, there are three other types of exits. Two of them are not optimal. The first is merging with another company. That's a potential exit, and that can be beneficial to both the investors and to the entrepreneur. The second type is not as optimal. It's selling to financial institutions. Now, when that happens, usually things are not going well.
Yeah.
I remember speaking with a banker, and he was dealing with a frustrated entrepreneur that wouldn't allow him to use his inventory as collateral. And his comment is, if the company can't sell the inventory, what makes him think that the bank can sell the inventory?
Probably some accuracy behind that.
Oh, I thought it was very true. And I've seen people try to use software as collateral, and that definitely is not a fly.
Yeah, well, I guess it depends what software it is, but correct.
Yes, but when the team leaves, if they're exiting the business, the software becomes known as orphan software. So there's no improvements to it. So that alone will devalue it. But the same thought process goes, if the entrepreneurs can't sell that software, how the heck could the bankers who know nothing about the software sell it? So they won't use that as collateral. So selling to a financial institution is usually not good things have happened. The third type is actually the worst. It's liquidation.
Right. The end all be all, the finish.
Yes. And you're selling things on pennies to the dollar. That's not something you want to plan for, but I thought it would be important to understand there are different types of exits. You want to be targeting and planning for the three that we first talked about, because those are optimal outcomes and those are very positive outcomes.
Yeah. So I think one really important thing you've mentioned here is that the exit for different roles, so the investor, the entrepreneur, the employee, can be very different. And understanding what's important for each of those roles can not only help you get there, but also help you understand how everybody else is thinking. So you can make sure that your best outcomes are being considered and you're not just following along on a pre-rehearsed docket to improve somebody else's outcome.
Yeah, and then the exit strategy can change and fluctuate, depends on various conditions. So it's not written in stone, but it is a roadmap that you do want to follow, but you may have to shift and pivot in the case of an exit strategy.
I see a lot of time that investors want to exit much more quickly than entrepreneurs sometimes. If the entrepreneur is enjoying the current lifestyle or the income or whatever it is, the investor is just in it to recoup costs. So there can sometimes be a little bit of a headbutting going on the speed that exit's occurring at.
Yeah, and there's possibilities that the entrepreneurs can stay while the investors recoup their investment and they're out. Very often you'll see that with an acquisition where the entrepreneurs are still a role and component of the acquired company. There's some problematic issues to that, though, because then you have a new team formed. They may not truly be in charge. There's all types of dynamics. I usually see that doesn't work out well in my experience, but I've seen some cases where it worked out great.
Yeah, that and people skip over the rounds closing. So whether it's a seed round, round one, round two, whatever it is, the investors that are currently in the business can exit at that time. So if there's a bad relationship going on, an investment that needs to be recouped, whatever it is, that can also be a way for certain parties to exit while the entrepreneur or the founding team gets to stay along.
That's right. So this is a lot of moving pieces to this, and that's why we need to do this in two parts, because there's so much to cover with this. Now, one of the areas that I found the most difficult is timing the exit. It's hard to predict where things are going in the future. Determining the right time to exit is an issue that you want to look at. What is the economic cycles that you're dealing with? What are market conditions, which can fluctuate dramatically? And also the financial health of the company. The financial health of this company is something you can plan for as you move forward to try to make it as healthy as possible. But even that has some fluctuation that can be difficult to predict.
Yeah. If you want a great example of timing, look at healthcare and technology companies and the multiples they were getting over COVID. And now, less than a year later, the multiples they're getting. For an example, healthcare technology was getting about a 22x multiple, so 22 times yearly revenue. And now they're getting about 8. In less than a year, the valuation of that company, what they could have exited for, has drastically changed.
I had a friend that many years ago, he and a few of his friends who were in college created an email platform. I believe it was the first email platform that was written on Novell.
Oh, wow.
They dominated the market. All of them were techies. So they kept going into version 2, version 3, making it better. And their competition was still on version 1. And my friend said, we used to laugh at them saying, look, they're still on their old version. But they were focusing on market share and market capture. And they focused on securing 70% of the top 10 companies in the world, and they were successful. That company grew, and they were a little company called Lotus.
Oh, wow.
And my friend said, by making that mistake of working on developing the technology and the versions and ignoring the market share, he estimated that cost him in the sale of his business about $20 million. And you're talking about 25 years ago dollars.
Yeah. So a lot more today.
When they sold the business, they were no longer number one and dominated.
You hear a lot about the timing of hitting the inflection point, so that hockey stick growth. So as soon as you can accurately predict a sharp spike in growth is when typically companies are trying to exit or raise money or go through any of these big pivotal steps.
It's almost akin to a world-class athlete in college. When should they declare, should they stay their senior year to develop their value, or is the market ripe? And there's so many factors associated with that. It's very similar.
That is ironically similar because the risk of injury, all these things that are total unknowns can happen as time goes by.
What I'd like to talk about is preparing for the exit and making your company attractive to potential buyers, and it involves several steps. The first step that I always like to look at is the financial health of the company. You want to make sure your financial records are clean, they're accurate, they're well organized, because you can be assured any potential buyer is going to be looking those with a fine-tooth comb, making sure that that's structured and organized so they're able to track actually what's happening. If they're very sloppy, that can be a cause for an acquisition to fail.
Absolutely. And more than just clean, have some insight into it. A large Excel sheet with a final column isn't quite good enough because you need actionable insight on what that financial health is telling you. There are lots of online platforms, lots of people that are very good at Excel that can generate that sort of data, but that's really the qualitative data that people are looking for.
A second area that is looked at is a strong customer base. So the buyer wants to see a diverse and growing base, and that adds to the attractiveness of the purchase. Now, the contrary to that is if there are only several companies that are customers, that increases the potential risk. If you lose one of those, you could lose a big percentage of the business, and that makes buyers nervous.
Yeah, I don't know the accuracy of these things, but I've been told that no customer should represent more than 30% of revenue, that you're in big financial trouble if that's the case.
For sure. I see a lot of people starting off and they immediately go to sell to Walmart, and Walmart will become 90% of their business. And I always tell them that's a big mistake because then Walmart owns the business. They don't.
Right. They get to push all the buttons.
And they get to set the price, and they will squeeze margins really tight. Another area that should be prepared for is to make sure you have a solid business model. The business model has to be scalable and offer strong margins. That's a key selling point. So you want to structure your business in a capacity that it shows potential buyers that there's room for growth.
Oh, absolutely. That's why you would be purchased. That's why somebody would be interested in taking it over, because they think they can take you to the next steps.
Another area that falls in line with that is recurring revenues. That makes you a very attractive acquisition. So if there is monthly payments from your customer base, quarterly, even annually, versus if you're out always searching for the next sale, that makes it less attractive to a buyer. Recurring revenues is something I always like to see in any business I'm involved in.
Yeah, the term MRR, monthly recurring revenue, is the staple for multiples. So when most businesses are looking for a sell point, they're looking to apply their monthly recurring revenue to some sort of multiple. If you're interested in reading more, the Bessemer Index puts out a lot of these multiples. It's sort of the golden currency of what a multiple can go for. So you can research the Bessemer Index.
A fifth area would be efficient operations. You want to make sure that your company is streamlined and operating in a very lean, profitable manner. So it shows the buyer that it's professionally managed. If there's a lot of fat within that, if it's not lean and mean, again, those are areas that makes the negotiations much more difficult.
Oh, without a doubt. And it's little things like that that inevitably a business is going to have some of that become the negotiation points. It's why you get a little less than the multiple, a little more than the multiple. It's where the wiggle room comes into play.
Now, another area which is extremely important, they're all important, but extremely important, have a strong management team. If you are the business and you're being acquired and you walk out the door and there goes the business, it's going to be virtually impossible to sell without you staying there. And that causes all types of problems. It might not be what you're trying to do, especially if you're a serial entrepreneur, you want to go to your next venture, you're stuck there. So you want to, as you're moving forward, make sure, we've talked about this in another podcast, replace yourself so that the buyers understand they can walk in and the team is operating efficiently without you.
We have talked about this quite a lot, and I think it's just so important. In the work that I've done with angel groups, oftentimes they will reflect that they're buying the dream of the team, not really the business. And the earlier stage you are in startup, the more important that is. Before you can prove a track record, your team is what's investable.
And that goes into something we talk about quite a bit and we're doing research on is entrepreneurial culture.
That's exactly right. We're hoping to move that needle forwards.
Another area is the legal aspects. So you want to make sure your contracts, your intellectual property, your regulatory compliance are in order. Legal issues can be a deal breaker.
Oh, and I've seen it. People that don't have secured intellectual property, especially if they're in the development world and they don't have the proper contracts in place to show ownership of that, it's over. That can absolutely be the showstopper. And ironically, it never really pushes the deal forwards. It can just ruin it. So making sure that everything's in place is vital to the success, because you can go through all of these other steps and then just ruin the deal on the finish line.
I was involved with purchasing a company, so I was on the buyer's side one time, and I was concerned with many of the issues, but one of those, I was concerned whether there was skeletons in the closet. And I didn't want to buy the skeletons in the closet. If you purchase the company, you're buying those skeletons, you own them. I did the purchase as an asset sale. I didn't actually buy the shares of the company. The company that I purchased the assets, they had to roll it down and go defunct. So they had to close it down. And I started a new business with a very similar name. So it was somewhat transparent to get rid of those legal issues. It is a big issue. And we see very often intellectual property is one of those that is so difficult, especially if you're in a tech business.
Absolutely right. And that's where the classic disclaimer of make sure you talk to a lawyer about it.
Definitely. Another area is what is the growth potential? You want to demonstrate this future growth potential of the business, because the buyers are not buying just the current business, but also its future profitability. And if they don't see a future profitability, I see no reason why they want to buy it.
Yeah, that's that hockey stick growth. They want to come in at an inflection point. The last thing they want is to see rapid growth and then stagnation, because then they're buying that stagnation.
Another area determining the steps to prepare for an exit strategy is actually the exit strategy itself. What I'm saying is you want to clearly define what your exit strategy is, and you want the potential buyers to understand your intentions and your timeline. So they have to know what's in your mind, where you plan on leaving, what your issues are associated with that. Clearly defining the exit strategy to the buyers is very important.
Yeah, not only to the buyers, but to the team. Oftentimes, that's a huge motivator. Making sure everybody's on board with the dream that's going forwards and the end goal is enormous and can't be underplayed, no matter who you're talking to. Investors that are coming on, people that are purchasing it, so that exit strategy, the team that's getting you there, clear communication on where you're going, and that exit strategy is huge.
The last area of the steps, and this will be the 10th that we've discussed, is your professional help. You don't want to try to do this yourself. You may consider having a broker or an investment banker that specializes in business sales. They can help you prepare for the sales, the market for your business, and negotiate with potential buyers. All of those things are probably not the expertise of the founders of the business. Again, I'll go back to a sports analogy. Professional athletes have agents representing themselves, and they usually end up with a bigger deal, even though they're giving a percentage of the sale to, in this case, the broker or the investment banker.
There are people that have made a career out of it. So unless that's really what your career is, you should probably have some help.
Those are the 10 areas that I believe you should prepare for before you even consider the actual exit. So you should be planning and preparing and setting yourself up so that you're ready to make that move when the opportunity arises, because you never know when it will arise. You never know when someone may approach you versus you going off soliciting.
That's exactly right. That and most of these are just good business practice. If you're keeping these principles in mind during business growth, even if it's not for an exit right now, it's going to help you grow.
Those are the areas that I wanted to discuss in part 1 of this exit strategy. Part 2, we'll be talking about areas of due diligence. What are the roles of those advisors we just talked about? Maybe providing some examples and lessons learned.
Fantastic. Stay tuned.
Definitely. And if any of our listeners have any interesting exits that they'd like to share with us, well, we can include it in the next episode.
That'd be awesome, wouldn't it? Get some actual listener information in here. Let us know what you've done.
That sounds great. Well, in the interim, let's get entrepreneurial.
Let's get entrepreneurial.
Thanks for listening to our podcast. As always, you can head over to ProfSpirit.com to check out more resources and courses designed for you, the entrepreneur. Please follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, and others to get the most up-to-date information as it is released.